The next panel, and we have four panels this afternoon, and one of them after the break is only for 50 minutes instead of an hour, so we're really going to try to make our way through these panels in a timely way. And this panel is about integrated pest management in practice. What are different strategies? What are concepts? What might be underutilized? And examine how land managers use that. The four panelists that I'm joined with, the first is Matt Baur, the Associate Director of the Western Integrated Pest Management Center. He just told me where he grew up in Southern California. I love these bios. He's always had a fascination for animal behavior, so he must be drawn to politics. And from a very young age, he started collecting and rearing spiders in his room, and has a long history as a practitioner. Springer Kay is the program manager for Big Island Invasive Species Committee. She's asked a question already. She's overseen that for the last 6 years. It's a 100% grant-funded program of the University of Hawaii. She previously served as invasive plants project leader for Colorado State and has worked in invasive species, native forest, bird and land, and agricultural research projects across Oahu and Hawaii for nearly 20 years. Dr. Flint Hughes is the ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service, Institute of Pacific Island Forestry. He's a research ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service, is based at the Institute for Pacific Island Forestry located in Hilo. That institute is part of the Pacific Southwest Region Research Station. He's served in this capacity for the past 19 years. He's helped lead investigations regarding the impacts of the newly discovered disease, rapid Ohia death. We heard about that a little earlier, and has research findings, lives in Hilo. Our fourth panelist is David Smith, Administrator of the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, the Division of Forestry and Wildlife. He's the Oahu Branch Chief for the Division of Forestry, and has been promoted to become the administrator. He's a veteran state wildlife biologist and forestry and wildlife manager with 28 years of experience. And he got a glowing recommendation from Suzanne Case when he assumed his position. That is almost 3 years ago. So those are our panelists. That's the subject. Let's begin with Matt.
Oops, I just hit the advance button. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. So I have 3 goals in my 5 minutes. We'll see if I can achieve that. The first is to briefly introduce the idea of integrated pest management. The second is to talk about how the integrated pest management centers play a role in the development and promotion of integrated pest management. And then finally, just to talk about some of the key advances that the center has played a role in. I guess it starts with a test, right? Oh,
Here you go. You passed.
thank goodness. So when we think about integrated pest management, we really think about the people who are practicing integrated pest management in the field. And one thing that cannot be highlighted enough is the role that Extension plays in training the integrated pest management practitioners throughout the West, especially in the agricultural sector. So what have they been doing? What have they been training these people in? And it's the following mindset, that agriculture is part of a larger ecosystem, and perturbations to that system can have very complex outcomes, sometimes unpredictable outcomes. And so when we think about perturbations, we can think about things like pesticide applications, and when those applications are applied in the absence of thinking about the larger ecological system, you can have very bad unintended consequences. So what the practitioner really works to try and understand is the ecology and the biology of the system in assembling an integrated pest management program that puts together all the different management tactics that they might have available. Is there a lag on this?
There it is, yeah.
So you can think about integrated pest management as putting pieces together, putting pieces of a puzzle together. And I could put up one of those 1,000 pieces puzzles up here, but I elected not to do that. Instead, I just put them into 4 big buckets. Those 4 big buckets are prevention. So prevention might be prevention of an invasive species, making it across either a state or a national border. Avoidance, which could be something like planting a crop at a time when the pest isn't a problem. Monitoring, which I think we all know what that is. And suppression. And suppression, of course, can include things like pesticides. You can also think about integrated pest management as a Swiss Army knife, where all the different blades are all the different tools that you might use in managing your pest. So what is the role of the Integrated Pest Management Centers in promoting integrated pest management? And so what I've got here is a map of the United States, quite obviously. And there are lots of big blue dots on that map, and those are all contact points for the Integrated Pest Management Centers throughout the West. And of course, there's not just the Western IPM Center, there's centers in the North Central region, in the Northeast, and also in the South, and they, of course, also have their networks. The bigger the dot, the more contact points. But really the point here is that you can see that network that we are a part of, and I like to think that we're the center of this network, but that's probably not really the case, it spans the entire geographic region that we're talking about today. How connected are all of those dots on that map? So I struggled with this one a bit. I originally had put together all the different connections that the center has across this wide and expansive network, and I came up with the typical hairball diagram, which I think we've all seen before. And then I tried to explain it, and I couldn't. So what I decided to do instead, since this meeting is primarily state-centric, because it's Western Governors Association, I just focused on 2 components of the network, the State Departments of Agriculture and then the State Integrated Pest Management Programs. And what you could see is there's lots of dots and lots of arrows. And what it means is that there's lots of connectivity among those programs, which is crucial in achieving these outcomes. So we've been able to develop rapid and coordinated responses to a variety of different pests throughout the West. And we don't really address, at the Western IPM Center, we don't really address some of the big ticket items like rapid Ohia death or Asian longhorn beetle. We've been working more on things like European grapevine moth in California, South American palm weevil, which is a recent introduction into California, and coconut rhinoceros beetle in Hawaii and the American affiliated Pacific Islands. So that coordination is also clear in a variety of different work groups and regional technical groups that are involved in addressing things such as grape invasive species, as well as soybean rust. Of course, soybean rust is a problem in the Midwest, not so much for us in the West, but certainly the North Central Integrated Pest Management Program was heavily involved and invested in developing that regional project looking at that problem. And then here recently, we've also been working on things like the spotted lanternfly, which is a recent introduction in the Northeast. The centers and the IPM network have also been involved in developing a variety of different reporting tools, such as EdMaps, and also recently here we've taken on the idea of developing a response toolkit, which in essence allows programs that are addressing an invasive species to jumpstart their effort in terms of outreach. And then finally, I know most of us don't really like to talk about pesticides much, but for the agricultural sector, when dealing with a new invasive species, something like, for instance, spotted winged Drosophila, pesticides become a very important tool for us in that immediate response after the introduction, and until such time as we can develop an integrated pest management program for that new pest. And the West has been heavily invested in making sure that those registrations that we need for agriculture are in place when we need them. And this is important because we have a lot of specialty crops or minor uses in the West. And so that's one of the important things that the center has been doing. And that's a picture of a fellow from the Sequan Native American Indian tribe in Southern California looking at a palm frond pulling out South American palm weevil. And that's all I have.
Great. Thank you very much. Springer?
Aloha kako. I manage the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, so it's my honor and privilege, my kuleana, to offer you a sincere and warm welcome to our island. I really hope that you did all book some time to go and explore, because our island is amazing, from our crystal clear reefs to our native forests and hiking trails and our sometimes snow-capped summit. You want to take your time because the Big Island is bigger than Yellowstone National Park, New York City, and Disneyland combined, and we have about 3 taxis. This has been an exciting year. You may have heard we had a massive volcanic eruption over in the Puna district, and the roads are now open if you want to swim at the very newest beach on the entire planet. Try not to track any weeds in because we literally just got that place cleaned. We laugh so we don't cry. While things are mostly back to normal, our visitor numbers are way down, so we do really appreciate Governor Ige hosting this event here on the Big Island and giving you guys the chance to try some of our incredible local produce and see the natural resources that we do have to offer. If you've driven across our island, you'll probably understand why a lot of our settlements traditionally have been around the fringes of the island, and that at one point it really was easier to travel by canoe, paddling, than it was to travel across land. And you know, right now I can see you guys are having a little bit of the afternoon sleepies and maybe a little jet lag, so I'm going to suggest that we all stand up and we're going to have a little paddling lesson. We're going to do this. So everyone stand up. We'll try this. This might be a little awkward.
Everybody's standing up at home and they can't hear you.
I don't know that this comes out.
No, just
There we go.
stand.
There we go. All right, you can do this at home. Everyone's going to turn to the right, except we're going to turn to the left. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your paddle, which is right above your belly button, right here. Just grab it on the top. You're going to raise it up and bring it a little over to the left. And then I can't do the mic. You guys can hear me, so other folks can suffer. Over to the left, and you're going to grab the middle of the paddle with your left hand. And the way we're going to do this, not yet, when I tell you, you're going to reach forward as far as you can, dig that paddle in deep, and pull it all the way back. And each time we do that, I'm going to say Huki. All right, so are we ready? Everyone's got your paddle? Paddles up, and Huki. 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 And you want to watch the person in front of you. The timing is important. I know there's a PR person running around just waiting to get a picture, and you don't want to be the guy off beat. When we switch, I'm going to say hut, hut, ho, and we're going to switch to the other side. Ready? Paddles up. Huki, 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 hut, hut, ho, Huki, 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 hut, hut, ho, reach, Huki, 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 hut, hut, ho. Oh, you guys give yourselves a round of applause. You are such good sports.
Yeah, well, now we're going to move to questions.
All right, now how did that feel? Does everyone feel a little more awake?
Well, I'm actually a resident of Santa Cruz, California, and boy, that you found an exercise that made me feel right as home. You should have thrown in some incense and we'd have had it.
We're kind of that way on the Big Island. So you feel a little more awake. Maybe you let your guard down a little bit. Do you feel a little bit like you're part of your team? That's IPM. That's all it is. That's what we're trying to do. It's not just the methods. We are integrated as a group. We're coordinated, a well-oiled machine. Everyone's got a position. We're all moving in the right direction, and we're all pulling our weight. E kaupe aku no, I ka hoi ako mai. put forward the paddle and draw it back. Commit yourself and finish the task that you started. That's how you get a canoe to fly across the water, and that's what a successful IPM program is all about. And is it successful? Is IPM successful?
Well, I think so.
Yeah, you bet it is. And, success is always measured in dollars and cents. So in the 1980s, we had a decade of papers demonstrating that IPM is cost-effective for farmers. Successful IPM programs really can reduce pesticide use, achieve comparable levels of control, and even produce significant cost reductions for farmers. IPM, great for farmers. And then in the 90s, economists began to assign economic value to environmental goods and services. Now they can ask, does IPM really benefit the environment, or does it just make us feel good? So the nerds at Virginia Tech found that peanut farmers in one IPM project cut the 14 million pounds of pesticide they were using in just 8 counties by 33%. That's a huge cost savings for the farmers. And they reduced direct harm to the environment and human health, which they could put a value on at $800,000 per year. So the total public cost for that IPM program was $10,000. This is an 8,000% return on investment. And it got better. The economists also found that people were willing to pay $14 per year each to achieve these environmental benefits. So we're only asking them to pay 17 cents. So this tells us that we were actually significantly underinvesting in a service for which people were willing to pay and for which there was a tremendous return on investment. So here in Hawaii in the 2000s, we had the area-wide fruit fly eradication program, or FlyPM. Raise your hand if you're involved in area-wide at all, in any capacity. I know I'm not the only one who spent years counting fruit flies in the 2000s. For several years, farmers, USDA, ARS, UH Extension Service, Hawaii Department of Agriculture, we hookied together to suppress taphritid flies, which attack 400 different crops in Hawaii and were causing up to $300 million in losses to growers. The crazy thing is that 90% of those losses are what we call lost development. Right when Big Sugar and MacNut had gone down, we needed to make a big push for diversified ag, and farmers looked at those 400 different crops that grow really well here, and they looked at the very real chance that their access to mainland markets would be shut down due to fruit fly quarantine, and they didn't plant for decades. With area-wide, the fruit fly pests in the remaining farms were reduced by 60 to 90% over 6 years. That kept the existing farmers going and encouraged new farmers to finally give it a try. This is a huge success story for farmers and for natural resources, because what happens when farmers give up and ag land gets abandoned? Well, in the tropics, it converts to weedy secondary forests that are made up of pests and that harbor pests that go right back into the existing farms and into our native forest. And that's when my program, the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, has to get really busy. So area-wide created this positive feedback loop with long-term critical economic benefits, including an obscure one that the economists, and actually Susan Case just an hour ago, called hope. So a really key player in each of these, as Matt already mentioned, is the extension service at our land-grant universities. And here in Hawaii, they go by CTAR, or just extension. The universities in every one of the western states have this function, and it's the ability to bring all the agricultural players together around evidence-based methods in both the pest control part and the agriculture part to really get the job done. And on the natural resources side, we have my parent organization, the Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit at UH Manoa. PCSU employs over 400 researchers, staff, managers working on little fire ants, on aquatic invasive species, the invasive species committees, the watershed partnerships. And so this umbrella structure really brings the conservation partners together to work on projects that cross boundaries of jurisdictions and land ownership. And I think between what's impossible and what can be possible. So what we're really asking for you today is support for the university, these university programs, to support them the way they support all of us, and to really just hooky together. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Flint, it's time for your exercise.
Oh, no, sorry, I don't do any more exercise than that. That was my, just holding the mic. That was about all. I fortunately didn't drop the mic. Sorry, I'm a little uncomfortable up here because my experience sitting at a table in front of a mic is usually in the county court system. So you'll have to excuse me. No, I'm just kidding. Kind of, I'm half kidding here. My name is Flint Hughes. I'm a research ecologist here with the U.S. Forest Service. And didn't want to take a lot of time, but I wanted to share a little bit about what we've been learning and how we've been learning it about rapid Ohia death on the Big Island. Rapid Ohia death is a fungal pathogen that attacks our native Metrosideros polymorpha, the most dominant tree on Hawaii Island and most dominant tree across the archipelago, a native tree across the archipelago as a whole. Just as Springer was talking about, our work on this problem, on this issue, has really been cooperative in the most fundamental, truest sense of the word. It's involved a multitude of agencies working on the management and the science and the outreach of the disease. And it's really been an incredible, and I think Dave will touch on this, an incredible and a real working relationship between the county, the state, and the federal agencies that are involved. And you know, often when we're dealing with an issue, a conservation issue, we'll talk about our cooperation, and sometimes that's meaningful, and sometimes it's words. In this sense, it's been truly important and integrated, and we wouldn't be anywhere close to where we are without the level of cooperation. So I'm going to talk about the science. Since I'm a scientist, I'm going to talk a little bit about the science behind some of our understanding. And in doing so, I really want to highlight some of the folks that have been heavily involved in helping address and tackle some of the questions we have about this disease. And that includes my agency, U.S. Forest Service, our friends and partners at DOI, USGS. Their scientists have been integral in helping us understand the problems at hand here. And our pathologist friends, I like to call them our pathological friends at ARS, Ag Research Service. They have been probably the most important players in this whole kind of comprehensive work trying to understand about the disease. So I'm just going to run through a few slides, mainly just to touch on them, so in case that folks want to follow up with questions afterwards during the question and answer period. So a couple things. As I said, the cause of rapid Ohia death is a fungal pathogen named Ceratocystis. I won't ask you to say that, pronounce that. It took me a while to get it right. Two species of Ceratocystis that are from two distinct parts of the world. We don't have perfect matches in from these origin locations, but the closest matches for Ceratocystis leuco-ohia is from Latin America, and the other species is from Asia. And this is a picture of Lisa Keith, who's kind of the leading pathologist in the project, and she has such a smile on her face, and it looks like she's smiling about this poor little Ohia seedling that's dying. It's not that. What she's smiling about is the understanding of it, knowing where it came from, proving that this was the pathogen that is responsible for this death, because that's very important. If you don't know what's killing trees out there, there's no way you're going to be able to tackle the problem. And so Lisa, in her work, she started looking at Ceratocystis as a potential cause. 6 months later, she had proved that it was the cause, which is just an astounding finding and set of work to be able to find out that quickly. And so I'm ever grateful for her hard work and her continued work on the issue. So as I said, this is where we think the two fungal species came from. Again, Latin America and Asia. They're not closely related at all to each other, but they both kill ohia trees. Leuco-ohia tends to kill them more quickly and in a more extensive fashion than Ohia. Oh, I think I'm on automatic. I don't know how to change that, but that's okay. That's good, actually. So this is the distribution of the disease across the Big Island. And it also, if you look at the color coding, it kind of shows the march of the disease across, with yellow being the first confirmed samples that we were getting from diseased trees early in 2013. And then you'll see up to the most recent purple spots that are just a few now from 2018. But what we've seen in each of these areas is an infilling of the disease, an infilling of the mortality of Ohia across each and every one of these areas. Now it's not advancing. There we go. Just real quick, we've done a lot of work looking at the rates of mortality, how the disease affects stands over here once it gets established in an area. And so we have about 200 monitoring sites across the Big Island. The bottom line is we see where ceratocystis is present, it's killing trees at a rate of about 10% per year. That means if you have 100 trees in a particular stand, you're going to lose 10 of those trees every year. And so you play that out. If the rate stays consistent over time, you'll pretty much exhaust that stand in about 10, 12 years of time. We see a lot of variation. Some forest plots express much higher rates of mortality, close to half, close to 50%, so that half the trees are dead in 1 year, you go back and they're all dead the next year. Other places, other areas will see that the trees suffer no mortality. We know we have an infected tree, but we don't see any mortality in future years of sampling from that single tree or that pair of trees that we see on plot. Last thing about this slide, we see lower rates of mortality in younger trees compared to older trees, and that is probably related to either substrate or wounding. And if we play this out, worst case scenario, across landscapes where we have Ohia, if we see 100% mortality, we're going to be losing about 80% or so of the biomass of our forests, of our native forests. And we're going to replace that with lower stature forests that are more dominated by alien species. So again, that's worst case scenario. That's what we're hoping to avoid. These photos show a stand of Ohia in Puna before rapid Ohia death hit, and the lower, I think it's pretty apparent which slide is which. The Ohia stand, that's the after shot in the lower right. Why is this important? Why are we so concerned? Why is everyone pitching in to try to deal with this issue? It's pretty apparent when you look at the distribution of Ohia across the islands. You can see, again, it's our dominant tree. It covers almost 1 million acres across the island. And if you look closely, you'll notice that all of the blue areas in particular, the wet and the mixed wet and mesic forests, those are our watersheds. I mean, those are utterly our watersheds. Where we get the clean water that you're drinking today, this afternoon, that's where that comes from. And we can't afford to have this disease wipe out these extensive areas. There's some hope, and I'm not going to take any more time to talk about this, but one thing that we're finding is that fences can be very effective at keeping the disease out of our Ohia forest, and we're becoming more and more convinced about that over time, and that's a big area of research right now in what we're doing. So that's all I wanted to say. Give some time for Dave, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much. David, welcome.
Okay, as I said, I'm David Smith. I'm the administrator with the Division of Forestry and Wildlife here in Hawaii, and based in Honolulu is our office, and then we have branch offices on every island. So our number one priority with the Division of Forestry and Wildlife is protection of our freshwater supply. And so invasive species ultimately threaten our forested watersheds and therefore our water supply, and so for us that's a very fundamental concern. Another one of our priority areas is wildfire. So our wildfire program tries to limit one of the top threats to forested watersheds and native ecosystems. And a lot of the wildfire activity that we see is driven by invasive species. So native forests aren't adapted to burn, and as they burn and are disturbed and are replaced with introduced species and other invasive species, and grasses in particular, then they burn again and again and again, and slowly the native forests are eroded and irreparably damaged. Our forest health program, works on our invasive species front, trying to limit forest disturbance, and one of our prime forest health challenges and threats right now is the Ceratocystis outbreak. And but there's a bunch of things out in the forest killing trees, a bunch of disturbances to our forests, and our forests are not well adapted to disturbance, and a lot of times with all the new invasive species lurking around, once you have disturbance, and what you get filled in is introduced species and forest modification and whatnot. So that's something that we really try to work on. Rob Hoff is our forest health forester in Honolulu, and he does a really good job working on these different programs. Another big focus for the Division of Forestry and Wildlife is our conservation of native biodiversity. So threatened and endangered species, native ecosystems, and so it's a broad-based challenge. We work on many fronts, from the ocean to the mountains. We work on everything from forest birds and alpine regions all the way down into the ocean, seabirds and whatnot. So we have a very wide range of ecosystems that we deal with and manage, and we have threats across those landscapes. Climate change is another thing that we're constantly working on. It exacerbates all of the above, invasive species issues and whatnot. A lot of these things are driven, and the uncertainty of what's going to go on as climate change manifests itself. And so it's just part of trying to deal with and adapt to changes that are likely to be coming on an increasing basis. One of our programs that we're starting to focus on more is the Urban Community Forestry Program. For us, it provides an opportunity both to make a link with the community directly and to address many of our other impacts that we're seeing, provide green infrastructure, reduce urban heat island effects, provide carbon sequestration, improve and limit urban stormwater runoff, improve health for the community, and can also fit into our transportation sector. Our forest products and carbon sequestration program is another program that we've been working on really hard. It is a very complicated and technical thing that involves, sequestration. Are you going to go for carbon taxes? And there's voluntary and compulsory markets and a lot of different things to work through. But we've started putting trees in the ground. We're trying to figure out how to roll that out to scale and make it a program that can, both do the carbon sequestration, but also it's a restoration of native forest habitat and forested watersheds. So it's a program that has benefits across a number of fronts. Okay, another one of our programs is our hunting and nature-based recreation. So a lot of health benefits for the general public. It engages the public in our programs, and hunters can also help with our invasive species issues and in terms of helping to maintain and limit some of our feral species invasive issues in the forests. So, people come to Hawaii, it's a beautiful place, it's, paradise, but it's also paradise for invasive species. It's like a lot of people have said, it's pretty much 365, 24/7 growing season. And so that presents a real challenge for us as managers trying to stay on top of the constant influx of things that come in here and frequently don't bring with them their biocontrols, things that control these species in their native habitat. Okay, so our invasive species, the threats and impacts are wide and diverse, and they have impacts across all of the work that we do, the species work, the landscape scale work, our forests, forest health and whatnot. So everywhere from seabirds to forest birds and everything in between. Okay, the work that the field crews are doing, this is the part where the integrated pest management comes in. So folks are out there doing this work on the ground, and it requires an extraordinarily diverse and integrated network of individuals, organizations, agencies, and techniques in order to go after the different types of threats that we're dealing with. And so, you know, a lot of the agencies and organizations are represented here in this room today, and they're all out there working together in partnership, trying to, you know, go after and prioritize and control a lot of these species that are our worst problems. There we go. So, you know, you see the dots on the map? Well, a lot of those dots is the type of terrain you're talking about, and these folks are out there, you know, working. So we've had a lot of kind of novel new approaches to try to how to deal with this, because when you get a report of, you know, a Myconia plant or something out there, it's just a dot on the map, but when you actually go to try to deal with it, these types of things that the field crews are dealing with is this type of terrain. So it's extremely challenging, and that's why things like biosecurity, just keeping things out in the first place, and then biocontrol, so people don't have to get out on the ground necessarily and do a lot of this work themselves, is really important for us to push forward. You know, fencing is our first approach in a lot of our forested watershed areas, and even down into the coastal areas. So fencing for us represents prevention and limitation of disturbance, and that's a good place to start. Flint has mentioned that they're seeing fencing, fenced areas as being kind of a bulwark against some of the stratocyst outbreaks. So it's having benefits that we didn't even realize prior, but obviously impacts can be severe, and you know, protecting our areas in the first place from a lot of the invasive species issues that we have is our first line of defense. What we're really trying to do is maintain forests. You know, the gold standard is prevention and maintaining healthy, resilient forests and ecosystems that provide fresh water and native ecosystems on a landscape scale. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to ask a few questions right across all four of you, where anybody that wishes to jump in can, and then we will go to audience questions. But one I thought I'd lead with is something that probably should have come up. It's come up tangentially, but whether it's Western states and Native American tribes, or whether it's in the islands and it's American-affiliated Pacific Islanders, that is an interest group that needs to be involved and is involved in integrated pest management. How do you deal with the inclusion and the coordination in the efforts that you undertake? Who wants to start on that?
I can start.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the first step is just inviting them to have a seat at the table, you know, and so there are certainly members of Native Hawaiian groups that are involved either as a group, as an organization, or as individuals in invasive species management throughout the state, and certainly could be here in this room right now.
Who else wants to take a crack?
Yeah, I mean, following up on what Springer has said, it's informing people in a respectful way, not pointing fingers. When we talk about rapid Ohia death, We like to let people know what we think are modes of transmission, and let people know, hey, maybe you shouldn't move that infected wood around from place to place. Maybe you shouldn't wound trees when you're out in the forest, but really not in the least accusatory way. We don't want to alienate people, and we want to bring them in. And there is a annual hula festival on the Big Island, and the run up to that part of it is really boils down to a kind of a celebration of Ohia in a lot of the chants and the dances. When Rapid Ohia death really became a big concern, we knew that we needed to talk to the hula community and inform them and ask their assistance in kind of controlling actions in a way that didn't expose Ohia to infection. And I think it's a testament to the folks who did that, had those conversations with folks in that community, that it was really adopted and really embraced to the point where you didn't see Ohia that in any of the performances, because people were regulating themselves. The kumu were regulating their dancers to the extent that Ohia wasn't being picked. And it's still, I anticipate this coming year, it will be the same. And a funny thing, on Facebook or Instagram, there were conversations during the festival when somebody popped up with what looked to be Ohia. There was all this chatter about, hey, that better not be Ohia, from the aunties that were commenting on the performance. And so it really comes to an honest, open, non-threatening dialogue and really embracing each other's values and going from there. I think that's where you find success. Sorry for that long answer.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll chime in.
Go.
So I just wanted to pile on to Flint's comment. One of the things that we've done in the West is, especially in California, the Native American Indian tribes have a festival called Big Days, which is usually a celebration of the fall harvest. And that's an outstanding opportunity to become immersed in those cultural norms and develop relationships that there would really be no other way to develop because of the social setting in which you're in. You know, it's easy for us to invite people into our social setting and expect them to be receptive to our message, but that doesn't always work so well. I think it's oftentimes instructive to go to somebody else's social setting and in so doing understand a little bit more about their cultural norms and how they communicate.
Real quick add, you know, it also sometimes needs to be required, that the inclusion. And so what you see on many of our boards and commissions in the state of Hawaii is that at least one seat, sometimes more, are reserved for somebody who has experience as a traditional and cultural practitioner or is of Native Hawaiian descent.
Let me ask a question that's a little bit maybe a layperson's question, but it's where integrated pest management fits in the invasive species continuum, because there's really preparation for potential invaders, interception and detection efforts, rapid response and eradication, and finally pest management if it establishes over time. Where do you think integrated pest management is most effective in those stages?
Oh, is that for me?
I know, I'm looking for whoever wants to answer.
I'm looking at Matt.
And three of you are stepping backwards and one is stepping forward.
It's the whole thing, right? It's, if you think about Matt's first slide with the puzzle pieces, it's the whole thing. It's the prevention, it's the avoidance, it's the preparation, it's the education, it's having the infrastructure in place for when it does happen. The whole idea of integrated pest management is that you're not just integrating this pest and this practice on this farm, it's the whole chain and integrating that.
Who wants to add anything to that?
Oh, I'll jump in. So yeah, it is a continuum between the avoidance and prevention, and then all the way up to suppression and management. And, anytime that you have a pest, and it's going to vary across ecosystem suites, what is going to be your approach? Mechanical, chemical, biological, and just depending on what the challenge is and the terrain you're dealing with, and, specific areas and whatnot, is going to depend on how you treat it. And most of what we do is integrated pest management, in one way or the other, in different, formulations or different prescriptions. But the work that we do, specifically out on the ground, is a continuous, evolving suite of integrated pest management.
Anything else?
Just thinking about Rod a little bit, just because I have a one-track mind, it seems these days. We're pretty convinced that the disease came in on nursery material, and that we're spending a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money trying to protect our forests that perhaps we may have been able to keep from coming in the first place. And boy, wouldn't we be in a better situation if that hadn't been the case. And we're not talking of something 100 years ago. We're talking about something that was probably within the last 10 years. And so creating structures that help us avoid those introductions onto the islands would be terrific.
Let me ask one more question of the group, and then we'll have a little time for questions from you, so get ready. And my question is just how the integrated pest management approaches on invasive species might differ across sectors, because we've heard of forestry, we've heard of agriculture. How does it differ across those sectors and how you choose to do it?
You want me to start? Sure. So from the agricultural perspective, integrated pest management is much easier than it would be in any sort of conservation effort or forestry effort, because we're usually dealing with a limited set of decision makers and private land, and that makes everything a lot easier.
Yeah, Matt and I were talking about this last night, and a lot of times with agriculture, you're just trying to get it out of your field or whatnot. You're trying to get your crop to market or get it to the point where you can actually move it on, and you can start over in a lot of cases. With conservation, for one thing, the agriculture sector has a lot of more leeway, I think, in terms of legality of using different types of things. It also has a very large market, whereas in conservation, a lot of times, say we want to do ant control, we want to control, Anapolipus on offshore islands. There's not that big a market. We're not going to buy, hundreds of thousands of tons of something that a company comes in and develops for us. And so it's harder sometimes to get the private sector involved in helping us out to develop the tools that we need to treat some of these outbreaks.
Right. Anything else? Let's move to your questions. Who has a question? Got one right here in front.
In the middle again.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Kevin. Mark Fox again from the Nature Conservancy. Flint and Dave, you both talked a bit about fencing, and Dave had a picture of that. Can you both, I think, most of us in the room from Hawaii knew what you were talking about, Flint, with respect to fencing and rapid Ohia death, and Dave, we all know about feral animals, pigs, goats, sheep, deer, mouflon, that were all introduced here. But I think there's probably a lot of crossover with Western states with respect to feral hogs or feral swine. And maybe the two of you can just explain a little bit more of what you were talking about or showing us for the benefit of those who are visiting, because this may be an area for WGA to, if it's not already engaged in addressing feral swine issues in the Western states, this may be an area for more collaboration. So if you could share a little bit more about what you were both talking about there.
So with Rod, I failed to mention this, Cerasticus is a wound pathogen. And so it gets into trees through wounds in those trees. And no matter how many spores are floating around, if trees aren't wounded, they can't get into the tree and infect it and kill it. And so And it's well known both from work done here and elsewhere in the world where we have other Ceratocystis species killing trees. So that's a real weak spot for the disease. And if you can control as much as possible the wounding of trees, you're gonna get a long way into building the resilience of that forest. And so what fences do in that case is they don't stop wind disturbance, they don't stop the movement of the spores. What they do stop is this chronic wounding of trees, whether that's by feral cattle, goats, mouflon sheep, pigs. All of those animals will wound trees in one form or another. And to have that chronic wounding going on, if you have spores floating around in the air and they land in that wound, that tree's as good as dead. And if it's not wounded, then it will persist happily ever after. And so that's why fences have become such a focus for us to consider in terms of the management. And as David had said, it's part of the management approaches across the islands and has been for decades. And we're glad to see that it has that added benefit of protecting trees from rot.
Yeah, for Division of Forestry and Wildlife in Hawaii, there were no natural grazing and browsing animals in Hawaii. So any amount of animals in our forests, in our native ecosystems, degrade those ecosystems. And so for us, it's a matter of trying to limit them, limit those disturbances in the first place. Native ecosystems can persist quite well if in an undisturbed state. They're quite resilient. It's when the disturbances come in that we have a lot of problems. And so fencing is kind of the baseline for us, trying to keep those animals out of the forest, trying to limit the disturbances in the first place. That is the most cost-effective way for us to manage invasive species, is just by keeping them out. And now, as time goes on, we start to see additional benefits, like even the disease benefits. I mean, we were trying to just keep animals from eating plants, and now we find out that there may be associations with preventing disease and whatnot. So fencing is really the foundation of our forest protection efforts.
And sorry, so there are two components to fencing. One is putting the fences up. The other is getting the animals out. And that support for that it's kind of a hand-in-hand thing. For Rod, if you happen to fence an area and don't fairly promptly get animals out, you're almost creating a situation that will cause more wounding of trees because they're trapped in there. They're kind of going around the same area. And so that's actually the worst case scenario. So we really need, when we're thinking about fences, we really need to make sure that we build in that ability to remove animals from those fenced areas. And that can be the hardest part, frankly, in times.
It's extremely challenging in the fact that these animals are also popular game animals, so people like to hunt them, and so there's kind of a dynamic tension between native ecosystem protection and hunting recreation. And so that's, there are areas that are highly disturbed and are appropriate for hunting, and then there's other areas that we're trying to really minimize the number of animals. Hunters can also be a real strong partner with us in those efforts as well. But as they're finding out in the western United States, throughout the United States, as a matter of fact, all the way back to the Smoky Mountains and feral hogs back there, feral swine are extremely difficult to control. They found that out in Texas, where they're trying to shoot them from the air and poison them and just do everything. It's like no rules, and they just have decided they can't get rid of them. But even in the continental U.S., there's some popular hunting animals, so hunters are actually spreading them around California and different areas. So it's a real challenge, and presents land managers with a really difficult a problem. USDA, APHIS, Wildlife Services works a lot on these kind of problems, and feral animal issues can be extreme, and in Hawaii they are at the top of the list.
We have time for one more question. Who else had a question? There's one right here.
Adrian Ares, University of Guam. There are several varieties of Ohia, and I wonder if somebody is looking at the possibility of tolerance or resistance to the rapid decline in these varieties, and at the same time, the mechanisms involved. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Ohia's been on the islands for about 4 million years. It's diversified from who knows how many foundings of it. Across the islands, it's diversified into just about every ecological niche possible. And because it's been here so long, because it's spread across so many environmental areas, it has a wealth of variation built within its gene pool. And so that gives us a lot of hope for potential natural resistance to the disease. We see inklings of that in some of our recent research, and we need to dive more deeply into those questions and search around to look at what the true resistance or true tolerance may be. But that's an active research path right now. So great question, thank you.
Anybody else wish to add to that? We might have time for another quick question. Does somebody else have a question?
We answered all your questions, right on.
Well, you know, if I could just very quickly add on to the previous question, we were talking about the feral pigs and the differences between ag and natural resource sector and IPM. And I think in the ag sector, there's a real recognition of the value of suppression, that you can suppress a species below a certain economically valuable or important level. And that's a real benefit to the farmers, and that there's a justification for public expenditure to achieve that benefit. Whereas at the natural resource level, we've embraced early detection, rapid response, which is great. We've embraced prevention, which is great. But there still remains also for our forests a value in suppressing these invasive species. If you have a few feral pigs left in the forest, a reasonable number, it actually does reduce the harm. If you have fewer of any of our invasive species, it reduces the impact that they're having on regeneration of our native species. So I just want to make a plug for that. We don't necessarily want to cut off programs at the point that we realize we can't eradicate it from the entire island.
One last thing about agriculture and our native forests. On the Big Island, at least, I don't know how true this is for other islands, but abandoned agriculture, agricultural lands really become a source of a lot of our worst weed species, particularly plant species. And so encouraging agriculture, diversified agriculture, any kind of agriculture across the lands that have been historically agriculture in Hawaii is a great way to try to protect our remaining forests from invasive species, non-native invasive species. So agriculture and conservation of our forests really go hand in hand in multiple ways, including suppression of alien species into the forest.
Great. Please join me in thanking this panel for a very